I spoke with Washington Post Society columnist Sally Quinn. She turned her experience on the Washington Newsbeat into a first-rate novel about the power and the people in Washington, all fictitious but all very true to life. She also shared some insights into Lee Hart, the wife of the former presidential candidate, and a bit about her marriage to Ben Bradlee, editor of the Washington Post, and her son Quinn. Sally, first of all, congratulations. New York Times bestseller list, movie studios bidding for the film. You changed courses in the middle of a dream, but it worked, huh?
Well, it was happily, because I thought I'd be a reporter for the rest of my life, and then suddenly I decided to write fiction, and I kept thinking, well, I'm not a novelist, so if it doesn't work, I'll go back to being a journalist. The real trouble now is that I'm writing my second novel, and now I keep thinking I'm a novelist, so now I have no excuse.
Right.
If it doesn't work, I'm really in trouble.
Now the pressure's on.
Yeah.
I felt like a peeping Tom. You let us inside the power-hungry, social climbing people that run Washington, and I wonder if it's true.
Well, you know, people never realize how bad it actually is in Washington, and I think it was one of the problems that the Carter people had. They came to Washington, they were so naive, they walked into the city, and they couldn't believe that you really had to play the game in order to survive, and they didn't survive. I mean, Nancy Reagan said something recently, and I mean, Nancy Reagan has her own brand of cynicism, but she said Washington is a city that doesn't wish you well. And she's right. I mean, people come from the heartlands and they're so idealistic and they're representing their constituents and they want to do well. They get there and they realize the only way you can do any good is to get power, because that's the only way you can change things. And they get power, and on the road to getting power, they forget why they wanted it in the first place. And they get very cynical.
And I was thinking that very thing last night, that I felt like middle America, the heartland of America, might be left out by those making decisions in Washington. The rules are tough.
And people, you know, what happens is that all of these people who are there and who are making the decisions are people from the heartlands. And yet it's amazing how fast people get acclimated to Washington and the ways of Washington, and how quickly they forget what it is that they're there for. And I find it, I mean, I've been covering this as a reporter for the Washington Post for a long time, and I guess my major, if you will, is power. I've really liked studying power and watching people strive for it, get it, and then lose it. And sociologically, it's one of the most interesting things you can watch in human being, and it's like being in a zoo. I mean, my husband calls it the zoo factor, because as journalists, you're an observer. We sort of stand back and watch all of this go on. I mean, things have changed a little bit recently in that journalists have become part of this whole power structure.
Yes.
Since Watergate and since the advent of television and the importance of television news, journalists have become players now the way they never were before. So that in a way it is a little bit hard to remove yourself. But one of the things that makes it easy for me is that because of my husband's job and because of my involvement in the Post, I can go both ways. I can be an observer, and yet I'm part of it as well. And so by being part of it, I really know it and I see it the way it really is.
And the parts that you don't like, you discard, and the parts that you do like, I suppose.
Well, one of the things that I learned early on writing about Washington and about power is that you have to choose your friends very wisely and very carefully. All of the friends we have now are people, mostly our colleagues, mostly other journalists, people I know will love us if we didn't have any money or any power or any fame at all. And I mean, so many of the invitations we get are invitations to the job, to the position. And most of those invitations we don't accept. I mean, we really do live a very sort of private life. Every once in a while we dip in and out of the sort of official Washington, mainly because as a journalist and as a novelist, I need that. I need to be able to see it and watch how it works. But we do it as observers, as part of the zoo factor. But in general, our friends are people that we know are going to be our friends no matter what. And that's really important. A lot of people like Mike Deaver, for instance, who come to Washington and think they have all this power, and then they leave the White House and suddenly everyone turns against them. And I mean, they go into shock. They don't understand, because they forgot that why people were feting them and inviting them and celebrating them was only because of their proximity to power.
You write about the wife of the vice president's indiscretions and the head of the news weekly's indiscretions with her. It's interesting because you've written also a lot in real life about a woman's indiscretions versus a man's, and the double standard that would exist if Gary Hart had been a female.
Well, I did do a piece for the Washington Post when the whole Gary Hart thing broke, and I thought, you know, there was so much debate about whether he did the right thing and whether people should accept that, whether it mattered. And what I did was I turned it around and I said, suppose it were a woman presidential candidate, and she decided to shack up for the weekend, and she was married with children, and shacked up for the weekend with a Miami Dolphin, some 29-year-old hunk. Would the American public say, oh, well, that's her private life and leave her alone? No. I mean, they'd probably call her a whore.
Yes.
And I think that when I pointed that out, it was funny because a lot of men said to me, I was reading your piece and I kept thinking, oh, come on, Sally, don't be so hardline. And then I got to that part and I thought, you know, that's a point, that we really are not ready to accept it the other way around. But in the novel, I have the president's wife having an affair while she's in the White House. Well, I just thought it was about time that somebody that a woman in the White House could get away with that, and I worked it out so that she could do it. I mean, logistically.
Saying, you're not tongue-in-cheek, are you saying a woman could get away with what men have been getting away with for a long time?
Well, I am being tongue-in-cheek in that I don't think I wouldn't recommend it to the next First Lady.
No, but men have been in the White House.
But men have been, sure, men in the White House have been getting away with it. And I just thought it would be an interesting twist to see if a woman in the White House could get away with it. And I worked it out. I went to the White House with Nancy Reagan's social secretary, and we kind of plotted out exactly, logistically, how it would work. And
Which
it would
door?
Work. Yeah, exactly, where she went to the EOB, the old executive office building next door to the White House, and it worked really well. And
Lee Hart, you also have some feelings about how she handled Gary's debacle. And I think I share the same feelings, may I say.
Well, I like Lee Hart very much. I think she's a decent, kind, generous, wonderful woman, and she's not stupid. I felt extremely sad to watch her humiliate herself in front of the American people the way she did, and I don't think she had to do that. She's known about all of his philanderings for a long time, and she knew that he was lying this time. And I felt that when there were about 2 days she didn't say anything, she had laryngitis or something, and I thought, good for her, she's just not going to come out and support him on this. And then she came out and said, well, I believe Gary, and if he says it's true and nothing happened, then I believe him, and if I believe him, why shouldn't everybody else, because I'm his wife? And I compared it to that suttee where the Indian wives throw their bodies on their husband's funeral pyre. I called it political suttee because she was really throwing her life on her husband's political reputation.
And we all wanted as women to see her wring his neck.
That's right, because he shouldn't have been able to get away with that. But, you know, the problem is that she doesn't have anything else. She's been with him for 28 years and she doesn't have a career. She has no way to earn a living. And the only thing she knows is being a candidate's wife. And I guess she figured she'd put in her time, and if she had a shot at being First Lady, it was worth it.
Your life is hardly parallel to Lee Hart's. You have so much. You not only have a good marriage and a career, but you also have a wonderful son. It hasn't been all easy, though. Quinn's had some problems.
He's had a lot of medical problems. He was born with a hole in his heart. He had open heart surgery when he was 3 months old, and then he developed a seizure disorder, and he's had many other problems and surgeries since then, and he has a learning disability now.
Do you say, why me?
No, I'll tell you, it's interesting. You would think that you'd say, why me? But what I say now is, why not me? I mean, if a plane crashed, I think, why wasn't I? I mean, it makes you a little more nervous about things going wrong, because for the first, I used to think that I could sail through life and nothing terrible would happen, and when this happened, I began to realize that in fact terrible things do happen. But you know, I don't feel bad about this, because this is the most happy, joyous little boy you've ever known, and when you have a child who's had so many problems and who's been near death, it really makes that child so precious to you that I just can't, I don't want another child. I mean, even if somebody said you can have it all over again, you can have another child who's totally healthy. This is Quinn. I mean, this is who he is. If he has a speech problem, then that's part of who this wonderful child is, who I adore more than anything in the world. And in some way, I feel, I was very sick as a child, and so was my husband. And I think that in both of our cases, it made us really strong as adults. And I keep thinking this is Quinn's cross to bear. This is a struggle for him, but when he grows up, he's going to be stronger and he's going to be more of a survivor.
Thank you very much for taking time, Sally. I wish you lots of luck. Regrets Only is a terrific book. I loved the reading. And you're working on another now?
A sequel, right.
Great. Well, I wish you luck. Thanks a lot. Good to see you. Thank you. Sally Quinn.